When you bring me out, can you introduce me as Joker?
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is the definitive history of the Joker, including the must-read comics, animated TV shows, live-action movies, and video games. We are covering everything from Batman #1 to a spoiler-free analysis of Joker Folie à Deux. And we were very lucky to interview Dark Knight storyboard artist Jeff Henderson and Joker pop psychologist Vasilis Posius. This is going to be a long video, guys, but worth the ride, so let's get started.
And now let's welcome our host, the clown prince of crime, the Joker!
So the Joker first appeared in Batman #1, published in 1940, as the original foe for Batman's solo run. Yes, he's that guy. Now, his creation, just like the Joker's own origin, is up for debate. Bob Kane was originally credited with the creation of Batman. Even in the 2000s, his name was still on Batman comic book covers. Bob Kane became famous for his creation of both Batman and all of his foes, Joker included. But not everything was as it seemed. You see, he created the Joker in conjunction with two different artists on Batman #1, Bill Finger and Jerry Robinson. Bill Finger reportedly came up with most of the iconic design elements, basing him off of the titular character from the 1928 Paul Lini film, The Man Who Laughs. The similarities are striking: the horrific smile, the ghastly white skin, and even the slick back hair. Kane's idea for the character was more clownish, while Finger brought the actual menace to the Joker. Then, at just 17, Jerry Robinson drew a sketch of the Joker as a playing card, creating one of the most iconic symbols of the Joker even to today. He also claims that he influenced the development of the Joker as a sinister villain instead of as a run-of-the-mill mob boss. But again, it's all a bit murky.
But person, it's been 80 years. How come they couldn't get their story straight?
Because Bob Kane famously hated sharing credit on any of his comics. Like I said earlier, he used his role as Batman's co-creator to become a minor celebrity. As far as he was concerned, any other creators were taking fame away from him. So he vehemently denied that anybody else even helped, much to the dismay of Finger and Robinson. In fact, Finger died in poverty, never making any money from his creation of one of the most memorable supervillains of all time. In fact, there's even evidence that he co-created Batman, but this is the subject of a very great documentary, Batman and Bill, which I highly recommend. It was actually only in 2015 that DC Comics finally acknowledged Finger's part in the creation of the Joker. The first solo Batman comic debuted in 1940 during the golden age of comics. Now, during this time, comics were exploding in popularity, and they were also unregulated, meaning that they could show almost anything they wanted. As a result, the Joker in Batman #1 is a straight-up serial killer. He literally kills someone on the first page. In his first appearance, he kills a total of 3 people and tries to kill Robin, who was a child at the time. He isn't a gangster, he is completely diabolical. So this malevolence, combined with his strange appearance, produces a unique foil to Batman, one that highlights the fears and feelings of the 1940s.
And if you look at Batman and Bruce Wayne, he's this ultimate physical specimen, right? Kind of blue blood stock, as they say. Whereas his villains, and the Joker included, actually reflect in their physical grotesqueness, certainly elements that people back in the day would call reflective of degeneracy. But it's interesting, the Joker in particular, some of his facial characteristics, his pallor, thin lips in the early characterizations. These are actually things that criminologists back in the day documented and pointed to as signs of criminality. There's these, kind of, Black Mirror elements of these extreme aspects of physical form, of mental status, where Batman is on the extreme opposite pole as some of his villains.
In his first 2 appearances, many of the defining tropes and characteristics of the Joker are well established. The comic opens with him taking over a television station to announce his evil plan, something that we've seen in many other comics, movies, and video games. The Joker venom, a poison that forces people to grin while it kills them, is his very first murder weapon. And of course, a Joker playing card is left at the scene. The most influential Joker tropes are all here, created 85 years ago by Bob Kane, Bill Finger, and Jerry Robinson. Now, the Joker was originally supposed to die at the end of the first issue. Now, Bill Finger didn't want Batman to look incompetent, but his editor saw potential in Joker, so the last panel revealed that he was still alive. And so the Joker lived on. In the first 12 issues of Batman, the Joker appears 9 separate times. Now, in 1951, we get the first ever origin story of the Joker called The Man Behind the Red Hood. In this story, Batman and Robin try try to crack a 10-year-old robbery case committed by Red Hood. They eventually realized that the Red Hood was the Joker all along, except he wasn't the Joker when he committed the original crimes. Originally, he was just a regular thief who built the Red Hood disguise, but being pursued by Batman, he jumped into a vat of chemical waste that altered his appearance and broke his mind. Perhaps it even contributed to his inability to remember his own backstory.
Sometimes I remember it one way, sometimes another.
You know, the Red Hood becomes the Joker, and I think that's still the case in Killing Joke too, when he falls into that vat of chemicals, right? So if I were interviewing this person, I would want to know if they experienced any physical trauma to the head, which obviously can lead to a whole host of symptoms, but one of them would be memory problems.
This story continues to live on in the comics as well as many adaptations, and it sets up a very different dynamic between Joker and Batman. Batman helped create the Joker. If he wasn't pursuing him, or if he would have caught him, then the Red Hood would have never jumped into the chemicals and became Joker. At many points in the comics and other media, the Joker states that Batman and himself cannot live without each other, and that's established right here. Batman's eternal arch nemesis, the one that he can never fully subdue, was only created through his own actions.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
So then came the Silver Age of comics.
What's that?
Okay, well, I'll explain. So after World War II, the media landscape became a lot darker. World War II produced some of the most horrifying images ever seen. So entertainment kept with the evening news, including comic books. Following the end of the war, comics got darker with more explicit romance, horror, and crime. And then parents panicked. This psychologist named Frederick Wertham published a book called Seduction of the Innocent, which blamed comic books as a corrupting influence on teens. Specifically, he pointed to Batman and Robin and said they had a homosexual relationship. So then all these parents started mass comic book burnings because they thought that comics were corrupting their children. So in 1954, comic book publishers formed the Comics Code Authority. It banned sympathetic criminals, excessive violence, horror, bloodshed, profanity, nudity, and demanded that a criminal must lose every single time.
So basically the Joker couldn't be, well, the Joker.
Exactly. If DC wanted Comic Code approval, they needed to really water down the Joker's character. As a result, the Silver Age Joker is very silly and clownish. He had a lot of shtick, but he rarely, if ever, murdered anybody. Throughout the 1950s and early 60s, the Joker waned in popularity. I mean, I love the silly, goofy Joker as much as anyone, but what makes that interesting is the contrast between his maniacal, homicidal side. The Joker may have disappeared from pop culture altogether if it wasn't for this little TV show called Batman. The Batman TV show premiered in 1966 and was the Joker's first live-action appearance. He was played by Cesar Romero, who was the definitive live-action Joker for the next 20 years, even though he refused to shave his mustache. Now, the Batman TV show is primarily a superhero comedy. It was aimed at children and used a campy, over-the-top style as well as humor to tell moralistic stories.
This money goes toward building better roads. We all must do our part.
So it's no surprise that we didn't get the homicidal Joker that was featured in the first issue of Batman. Instead, Romero embodied the CCA version of Joker, a gangster with a clowny twist.
Cesar Romero was scared, but they're bound by standards and practices at the time, so you can't really get too crazy or violent or anything.
Many of his tools were lifted straight from the Silver Age comics, such as the hand buzzers, the acid-squirting flower, and even his hideout named the Hacienda. Hacienda. The Batman TV show Joker may have been sanitized compared to his original appearance, but Romero managed to sneak in some darker elements along with the comedy. For one, he perfected the maniacal laugh depicted for 20 years in the comics. And I don't care how much humor that's surrounded by, it's terrifying. Additionally, much like his comic counterpart, the Joker was always taking over news stations to announce his evil plans.
Yeah, that doesn't seem very effective.
Well, it is if you're basically a maniacal theater kid. The point is, when Joker took over the news, Romero got to look straight into the camera, and his gaze is just as jarring as it is when the Joker stares at us through the comic book covers. You see, in the comics, at least up to that point, the Joker had no supernatural abilities, unless you count his penchant for survival. Despite being surrounded by superpowered villains, the Joker was Batman's ultimate foe. The Joker was just a dude who fell into a vat of acid, so what set him apart was his smarts. In the comics, we saw this through his creations of poisons and gases, as well as his engineering of theatrical and effective weapons. In the show, Joker retained his intelligence. Now, obviously, he kept his predilection for poisons, but he also just outwits Batman.
Nab him anyway. Loitering on school property.
Wrong, kiddies. Look up the statute.
In Gotham City, the crime of loitering requires the loiterer to remain in the same spot for over 2 minutes.
Even if he is a more humorous Joker, his brain makes him slightly unnerving. As much as I love the homicidal Joker of the past, Romero's Joker was the perfect first live-action appearance of the character, and the numbers prove it. The Batman TV show was the longest-running live-action superhero show for more than 40 years. Its record wasn't beaten until 2007 Smallville, and just like his comic counterpart, Romero's Clown Prince of Crime helped push the show to success. The Joker also made a few other animated TV show appearances during the Silver Age. He appeared in the first ever Batman cartoon, as well as, strangely enough, Scooby-Doo.
Oh, do share, do share!
In the 1970s, the Joker largely stepped off stage. The Batman TV show wrapped in 1968, and after an appearance in 1969 on a TV special, the Joker disappeared for 4 years, until suddenly, in 1973, we got the Joker's Five-Way Revenge by Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams. Joker's Revenge returned the character back to his homicidal roots.
But then Neil Adams, when they got to the 70s, just threw down and was like, no, I'm not having this. And he kind of went full on horror movie, like dark, scary. Like that was really the archetype, all the kind of dark, grim and gritty versions of Batman and the Joker in Gotham are born more of that than anything else.
From the art style alone, it is clear that it's a scarier Joker than we ever saw in the 1960s. Many of the physical characteristics that were previously emphasized were taken to the absolute extreme by Adams' drawing. His chin was impossibly pointed while his eyebrows arched at an almost 90-degree angle. He's also more spindly than ever, painting him in stark contrast to Batman's muscly form. As he stares out of the cover with this leering stare, it is clear that he has returned to the unnerving guy that we first saw in Batman issue 1. The comic starts with Joker escaping Arkham. He was incarcerated 4 years earlier in Public Lunatic number 1, after he tried to kill Batman and Robin on a prop moon. The 60s were weird. The Joker wants revenge on everyone who betrayed him, and the comic does not pull any punches. There's a dead Joker victim on the first page, marked by a grin of the Joker Venom and a Joker playing card. Within the first 6 pages, 2 more people are dead, including a guy who was trying to go straight. This isn't a cartoon madman, this is a killer.
This is the skin of a killer, Bill.
He still frames his crimes through jokes, but the crimes aren't jokes at all. Just to prove how malevolent the Joker is, the final scene involves him pushing a wheelchair-bound elderly man into a shark tank. Now, none of this would have flown in the 1960s. This was a Joker for a new era, one dealing with the war in Vietnam, an active draft, and on the precipice of an oil crisis and stagflation. On top of bringing back the homicidal maniac we all know and love, this comic also established an interesting dynamic between the Joker and Batman. This is the first time we're showed that they're both reluctant to kill each other. See, Batman has a strict moral code. He won't kill no matter what. And this wasn't just a comic code authority thing. It's something that he has lived by since the 1940s. So, no matter how many times the Joker escapes and hurts people, he refuses to kill him. Now, the Joker kills people left and right. Always has. But when he actually gets the chance to kill Batman in this comic, he won't do it.
You're not a killer.
See, the Joker wants Batman dead, but only on his terms. In this instance, killing him would be anticlimactic. When he gets the upper hand, it's just in a run-of-the-mill street fight. There's no grand scheme, no theatrics. It would just be a regular murder, and Joker can't live with that. This dynamic plagued the pair throughout the years.
And the other thing that you come back to a lot in all these different interpretations is Batman's complete refusal to kill. Well, that's kind of his Achilles heel with the Joker, because not only is the Joker cool with killing, that's where he knows he can dig in Batman, and he wants to push him because I think ultimately the Joker and Batman, it's like a glorified version of Suicide by Cop.
In countless comics and movies, we've seen the Joker insist that the two cannot live without each other. They are the perfect foils, chaos and order, so they can never truly defeat each other. In 1975, the Joker made history once again, becoming the first villain to get a solo run at DC. Unfortunately, the series was not particularly well liked and ran for only 9 issues, although a previously unpublished issue was released in 2019. Enter writer Steve Englehart. Now, Englehart was a prominent writer, and DC brought him in to revive the Justice League and the Batman comic books. And here's what he said about that Joker comic series. Joker even got his own comic series, which made him blander than before. And then he said of his own take on the Joker, I also, to be as frank as Bill Finger, took an idea from the past by Bill Finger and resurrected the homicidal maniac Joker, along with all of his pulp darkness. Now, while Joker's Five-Way Revenge was the precursor to the return of the old Joker, it was really Steve Englehart's run that fully embodied DC embracing the maniacal, homicidal nature of this villain. This revived Joker is perfectly embodied in the Englehart comic The Laughing Fish. First of all, the tone of this comic is so different from any previous Batman comics. Englehart specifically said that he wanted to give Bruce a sex life to show the soul of an adult man behind the cowl. So it actually opens with Bruce visiting a partially naked Silver St. Cloud. Now, this isn't directly related to the Joker, but it sets a more adult tone for this series going forward. The plot of this comic is wild. The Joker pollutes the sea with a toxin that gives all of the fish his face. Literally, all of the fish have giant red smiles.
But why? Why would he do that?
Copyright.
Now do you say what now?
Yeah, you heard me correct. It's copyright. He wants to copyright all the fish on the eastern seaboard. They bear his face, so they are his intellectual property. He claims that no one can sell fish without paying him because it would be copyright infringement.
That just seems kind of silly.
I know, right? Until he starts killing anybody who won't give him the copyright. R.I.P. the Gotham City Copyright Commissioner, you didn't stand a chance. Also, on a darker note, in Sign of the Joker fish affects a cat after he eats one. So it's safe to say that they would have affected humans too, created a ton of insane people. Now, the Laughing Fish arc is one of our favorite Joker arcs of all time because it perfectly blends his clowny theatrics with his total insanity. Trying to copyright the world's fish supply is insane, and it would be laughable if the Joker wasn't so deadly serious about it.
Why so serious?
In some ways, the wackiness of the plan makes him all the more scary. No one can give him the copyright over fish. It's an impossible, childish idea, but no one can explain that to this irrational murderer. This comic arc also shows how all over the place Joker's mind is. At times, he can't even keep his own thoughts straight. Like in this panel, he worries that everyone will stop eating fish. Just to say that, the vegetarians wouldn't go along. The joke is, of course, that vegetarians don't eat fish at all, but Joker delivers the line with such intensity that it's kind of frightening. This isn't a man making a bumbling mistake. It's a man completely disconnected from reality. Englehart also increases Joker's obsession with Batman. In this comic, the Joker won't even let the police get to Batman, stating that the Joker must have Batman. Nay, the Joker deserves Batman. And for anyone else to destroy Batman would be unworthy of me. Throughout the 1970s, Englehart kept a sinisterly wacky Joker. In Dreadful Birthday, Dear Joker, it's implied that he killed, or at least knocked out, an entire police station, all while driving a car that looks like his head. He still has the bang your dead gun, except he's turned it into a spear gun so he can actually kill people with it. For his birthday, he straps everyone to bombs that are, of course, candles for his giant birthday cake. He's wacky, he's terrifying, he's the Joker, the one that we hadn't actually gotten to see since the early 1940s. And I'm not surprised that a darker Joker returned for the 1970s. The 1960s were incredibly turbulent, but there were still portions of America that clung to the stability and ideals of the 1950s. But by the mid-1970s, it was significantly harder to ignore the problems in America. For one, the Vietnam War dragged on with an active draft until 1975, when the fall of Saigon was televised across the world. The Watergate scandal broke, diminishing the public's trust in the US government. The economy plummeted and there was an oil crisis. And we can't forget that DC Comics was based in New York. These writers were influenced by what was happening around them, especially since Gotham is like a proxy New York City. In the 1970s, New York was in terrible shape. It was in the middle of a fiscal crisis that forced many public services to get cut and left the city dirty and filled with crime. The Joker's sudden turn back into his old homicidal self is a reflection of the times. Things were rough and uncertain, and the Clown Prince of Crime reflected this new New York City. Throughout most of the 1980s, the Joker remained wacky and sinister until one comic changed everything. The Killing Joke by Alan Moore and Brian Boland. This is considered one of the best Batman stories ever published. It expands on the Red Hood origin story and also makes the Joker darker than ever. Now, if you have not read this comic, I highly recommend it. It's a great story for its cultural relevance alone, but we'll also sum it up here. The Killing Joke has two parallel storylines, one in the modern day and one that expands on the Red Hood origin story. In the origin story, Joker starts out as a regular guy who's a down-and-out comedian with a pregnant wife. He enters a life of crime to make some money on the side, donning that infamous red hood. However, before he commits his first robbery, his wife and unborn child die in a freak accident. Now, of course, the mob doesn't let him pull out of the deal, and so he goes into the chemical plant. It's also important that the mobsters put the red hood on him specifically so he could take the fall. In other words, they were playing a practical joke on him. Batman then tries to intercept the robbery, and Joker jumps into the vat, emerging as the Joker that we all know and love. Now, in the modern day storyline, the Joker wants to prove that one bad day can drive anyone insane. To prove it, he kidnaps Commissioner Gordon and tortures him. Then he shoots his daughter, Barbara, who was Batgirl at the time, and she loses the ability to walk. It's also implied that he sexually assaulted her as he strips her naked and takes photos.
Okay, what the?
Now, In the current day, this decision has taken a lot of criticism, though it wasn't questioned at the time of publication.
A lot of people are like, oh, well, Barbara Gordon was fridged and all that kind of stuff. But you got to keep it in perspective. One was that was so far before that was even a thing. Like, it's become a rote cliche now, but at the time it was really revolutionary because, and the second is, talk about a progressive creator. Like, Alan Moore is the definition of that. Like, he was not playing into cliches. That was not lazy, low-hanging fruit. Like, that was very, very conscientious on his part. And I mean, I'll defend that creative choice because, yeah, the tragedy of it is the motivator for the whole thing. And it's not necessarily just because she's a female. It's because at the time she was at kind of where all these lines intersect in Bruce Wayne and Batman's life. And the Joker did that knowing how horrible it was and knowing the response that it would prompt. And that was the whole point.
Then the Joker puts Gordon into the funhouse ride from hell, forcing him to look at pictures of his daughter. Now Batman breaks it up, and just when it seems like Gordon will break, he decides to do things by the book. The comic is important for a number of reasons. For one, up to this point, it was the darkest Joker story ever told. If the 1970s re-rendered him as a maniac, then this rendered him as a true monster, brandishing real-world violence like gun violence and assault. Yes, he was an over-the-top showman. After all, he set up a whole amusement park for Gordon, but he's also scarily close to the actual human monsters in the real world. Secondly, it had intense effects on further Batman stories. It was originally supposed to be a one-shot, but due to its success, it was folded into the continuity. Batgirl could no longer walk. Barbara Gordon was forced to exit that role as she became a new superhero called Oracle. It also made Batman's vendetta with the Joker more personal. It's one thing for random people to die, but it was another for him to take away Batgirl. In further comics, Batman routinely references this as a defining reason why he hates the Joker. And thirdly, it's extremely influential on multiple live-action portrayals. In The Dark Knight, Joker's desire to push Dent into madness is clearly inspired by the Killing Joke's plot with Gordon. And Killing Joke also inspired elements of the 2019 film Joker, such as the failed comedian storyline and the musical sequence. It was also notable for its deep dive into the psychology of Batman and Joker, highlighting that their struggle can only end in tragedy. It begins with Batman telling the Joker, "We're going to kill each other, aren't we?" He visits Joker to know that he made a genuine attempt to talk things over and prevent that outcome. And then he finds out that he hasn't been speaking to the Joker at all, just somebody he forced to dress up as him. This immediately highlights that it's too late. The entire conversation was for nothing. Now at the end, Batman tries to reason with him one last time, and Joker says, "It's too late for that. Far too late." The Batman created the Joker, and now it's his burden to bear. He has to kill him or be killed by him.
It's miraculous.
Now this was not the last dark Joker storyline of the 80s. Later that year, A Death in the Family by Jim Starlin was published. Now this was an interesting story. It featured Jason Todd, who was the second Robin, looking for his real mother after finding out that he was adopted. Very long story short, his birth mother is entangled with the Joker, and the Joker beats Robin to death with a crowbar. And to make it even more shocking, the comic book reading audience actually voted for his death.
That is f***ed up!
DC editorial was like, we know he's not a popular character, so we'll leave it to you guys. And I think they took it for granted that, oh, no one's going to want to kill Robin off. And then it was a landslide. They're like, Jason Todd must die, you know?
Like the crippling of Barbara, Jason's death had a lasting impact on Batman. Batman felt responsible for his death since he made him into a superhero in the first place. This forced Batman to wrestle with the morality of having a boy wonder prodigy at his side. And it increased Batman's hatred of the Joker, once again making their rivalry personal. It also made the Joker a lot more villainous. Within the span of a few months, he took two superheroes off the playing field. He wasn't just a homicidal maniac anymore, he was an actual danger to our main characters. The 1980s still had one last great Joker comic, Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth by Grant Morrison and Dave McKean. First, I have to talk about the art style. It's actually a painted comic book, but it also mixes in 3D elements such as nails and lace to create a unique, almost haphazard feel. The painting style is also very impressionist, with few defined lines or faces. It gives everything like a blurry quality, which matches the insanity of Arkham Asylum. Also, fun fact for you metalheads, if this reminds you of industrial metal aesthetics popularized in the early and mid-1990s, you're right on the money. The artist, Dave McKean, created several album covers in this same style for bands like Fear Factory and Counting Crows. They also do something very interesting with the lettering. Many characters have traditional comic book lettering, self-contained and voice voice bubbles and easily legible, but Joker's script is scrawling and right on the page, rendering it nearly illegible at times. His actual text mirrors how difficult it is to understand him and his ideology, making the reader work just as hard as Batman to make sense of Joker's thoughts. Like the Killing Joke, it features parallel storylines. The first storyline is an origin for Arkham Asylum itself, following Amadeus Arkham's own descent into madness. The second storyline follows Batman descending into Arkham after the prisoners take control. Now, this comic was influential in quite a few ways. For one, it created the myth of Arkham Asylum. It was no longer just a mental hospital, rather it was a house haunted by the madness of its own founder, Amadeus, and the death of his entire family. Because of that, it's almost impossible to rehabilitate these inmates. The asylum only drives them crazier. Secondly, it really questions Batman's sanity, essentially asking if Batman and the Joker are just two sides of the same insane coin. Batman himself says, "Sometimes I question the rationality of my actions, and I'm afraid when I walk through those asylum gates, it'll be just like coming home." Batman, like the inmates, is haunted by his own trauma and has flashbacks in the asylum. And in the face of all his foes, many of whom have done innumerable harm and will continue to do innumerable harm, his decision to spare their lives actually seems morally questionable. Is he Batman, or is he a traumatized child who watched his parents get murdered? And thirdly, it's a massive source of inspiration for other Joker media. The game, Arkham Asylum, is a loose adaptation of the comic, with Batman facing off against Scarecrow, Killer Croc, and the Joker. And the entire Arkham series used this characterization of the Joker. The comic also inspired Heath Ledger's Joker, as well as some of the aesthetics from Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Now, of course, we can't talk about the 1980s without mentioning Batman '89.
Does he get those wonderful toys?
Now, this epic film saw the return of a live-action Joker for the first time since Cesar Romero. This Joker was closer to the Clown Prince of Crime archetype, but Jack Nicholson made it really dark.
Well, to me, Nicholson's Joker was very much an extension of the TV show. Like, he did have the acid-spitting flower and the barrel this long, and, you know, the silly hat and the chattering teeth and all that stuff, but with a level of malevolence that hadn't really been attached to it before. So I think, like, he took all those that stable of gags and that stable of like silliness and really filtered it through this dark kind of savage worldview.
But Nicholson's haunting smile and stare make him feel deadly serious. This Joker also highlighted real social issues at the time. The chemicals make him crazy, but they don't make him evil. He was already like that. This was the greed is good era.
Hubba, 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 money, 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 who do you trust?
And Burton questioned the status quo through the Joker. He even tries to lure people to their death by offering them free money, raining it down from the sky, a visual symbol of trickle-down economics. In the 1990s, there was a Joker renaissance with new projects popping up left and right. Now, of course, a lot of this was due to the success of the comics and of Batman '89, but we can't ignore the impact of video games. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, some of the first personal video game consoles went on the market. To promote sales, they often created games out of existing IP. Starting with the video game Batman the Caped Crusader in 1988, 6 video games featuring the Joker came out in just 5 years. As kids got to face off against him in their favorite game, they also looked for his other media. The DC Animated Universe, also known as the DCAU, kicked off with Batman the Animated Series, and this show is great. It is so perfect. This expanded on so many great comic book storylines and gave us what I think is the definitive rendition of Batman.
I know a lot of people who feel like Deanie's and Tim's version of Batman, like the animated show, is like the definitive version of Batman.
And it gave us a great new Joker voiced by Mark Hamill.
So, which of your tedious copyright forms do I fill out first? You may speak now.
It's hard to state how much I love Mark Hamill in this role. He brings a new flair to the Joker, mixing in a near growl when he's angry.
You killed Captain Clown!
While other times speaking as smoothly as a con man.
That's right. You're always blaming me. And the children wonder why we fight.
You can also just tell how much Hamill loves this role and this character. Mark Hamill is a huge comic book nerd, just like us, and he wanted to see the Joker done right. Every time he got a new script, he would get the corresponding comic so he could base his acting decisions off of the source material. He was dedicated, proven through his tenure with the character. He voiced the Joker in various animated shows and films for 30 years, finally retiring the voice in 2022. Now, Batman the Animated Series was a kid's show, so the Joker wasn't quite as homicidal as some of his comic book counterparts.
So no killing joke episode?
Absolutely not. It's for kids. Instead, this version of the Joker combines some of the clownier elements of the character with some real malice. For example, look at this early appearance in Joker's Favor. The episode clearly has some wacky moments such as Joker jumping out of a cake, but the story is really centered around Charlie Collins, a regular with the bad fortune of yelling at the Joker after he cuts him off. As payback, Joker says that Charlie owes him a favor. It's very Godfather.
I'll let you off if you promise to do a little favor for me.
To escape the Joker, Charlie moves states and changes his name, just to find out that the Joker has been stalking him the entire time. He does call in that favor, by the way.
Listen up, Charlie Brown. You're booked on the next flight to Gotham. Tell the family you have to visit a sick friend.
But it's actually just been a long con to kill Charlie.
You promised to send me home. I never said alive.
That's horrifying. Imagine yelling at someone in traffic and then being stalked for years. Batman the Animated Series also introduced Joker's romantic side with the original character, Harley Quinn.
The Joker having a love interest is a whole different side to his character and to his persona that you never really saw explored before. It's this whole thing to mine that had always been shut off.
I don't think anyone thought Joker would be a great boyfriend or anything, but the depths of his abuse that were showcased in these shows is dark. Now, trigger warning for domestic abuse, and if you or anyone you know is struggling with domestic abuse, please call this number. There is always a way out. In both the comic and animated version of Mad Love, Joker's abusive tendencies are on full display. We see how he manipulated Harley since she was his psychiatrist, all with the intent of molding her into his idea of a perfect girlfriend. He turns Harley from a career-minded, intelligent woman into somebody who's hopelessly in love with him that he can literally kick to the curb when she's not of use to him anymore. Most disturbingly, he comes very close to killing Harley. After she tries to make him happy by capturing the Batman, he's so angry that she took away his spotlight that he throws her out of a building. Real-life domestic abuse is horrifyingly likely to end in death, so despite the clown makeup and the Harley Quinn costume, this is an incredibly dark episode. To make everything worse, he also has successfully brainwashed her. Even after all of this, she still goes back to him.
Angel.
Their relationship shows a horrifically realistic side of the Joker. We might not have supervillain clowns running around, but domestic abuse is an all too real problem. His relationship with Harley grounds him and shows us how awful he is on a personal level. The final animated Batman show of this era was Batman Beyond, where things got dark. It's primarily set in Neo-Gotham, roughly in the year 2039. Bruce is 70 and retired. Long story short, this kid named Terry McGinnis took the mantle and started beefing with the Jokers with a Z, a gang who seemingly styled themselves after the original Joker. But in Batman Beyond, The Return of the Joker, it is revealed that the Joker is still alive, sort of, and this is where it gets messed up. While kidnapping Tim Drake, aka Robin, years earlier, he implanted a microchip in Tim's brain that allowed him to take control of his mind. So it turns out that the Joker has been piloting Tim Drake's body this entire time.
Robin? There's no Robin here.
Maybe he means our little Jay.
Luckily, Terry is able to kill him.
Good, I don't want to deal with no immortal Joker.
Yeah, me neither. So when Terry destroys the Joker, Batman finally sees him as a worthy successor and woo, happy ending. Now that ended the Joker storyline in that main Batman continuity. He still made appearances in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited for years. Now in the 2000s, Joker continued to make groundbreaking comic appearances. In 2000, there was a weird run called Emperor Joker where he got reality-shaping powers and just trapped Batman in a loop. It wasn't the best comic, but it was the Joker's kickoff into the new century. One of the most important moments for 2000's Joker was during Batman Hush by Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee. Now, Joker is not the main villain of the Hush storyline, but the fight between him and Batman in Chapter 7 shows just how far they've pushed each other. Believing that Joker killed his childhood best friend, Batman beats the shit out of him, fully intending to kill him, and he's pushed on by the weight of their shared history. He even says, "I think of Barbara," and snapping the Joker's neck becomes that much easier. And there's artwork where he is literally surrounded by Joker portraits showing how the Dark Knight can't escape him. Now, as he's beating him, Joker is swearing up and down that he didn't do it. Gordon stops him moments before Batman would have killed him, saying, "If you kill the Joker tonight, in the eyes of the law, in my eyes, you'll be no different from him." Batman backs off, but the ironic joke is that this was the one case where Joker was truly innocent. The whole plot was orchestrated to frame Joker and corrupt Batman. For all the horrible terrible things he's done, Batman almost killed him when he was an innocent man. Well, I mean, at least as innocent as the Joker could be. There was also a great one-shot, The Man Who Laughs by Ed Brubaker in 2005.
Wait, I've heard that name before.
Yes, The Man Who Laughs is also the title of the film that originally inspired Bob Kane, Bill Finger, and Jerry Robinson. High five! The comic was a darker, modern retelling of Batman #1 with Red Hood references for good measure. Now, I don't want to focus too heavily on the plot because, as a retelling, it's not really treading new ground. Instead, I want to focus on the visuals. It's like if 1940s Bill Finger watched True Detective and decided to follow that tone when he designed Batman #1. The art style is incredibly dark. The opening panel shows tons of corpses with the signature smile of the Joker. In many ways, the art reminds me of the Joker from the New 52. Now, we'll talk more about it later, but the Joker from New 52 is an exceedingly dark character. To me, The Man Who Laughs marks a visual turning point from scary Joker to truly horror-inspired Joker. Now, of course, the most defining Joker of the 2000s didn't come from the comics at all. Instead, it came from the big screen in Christopher Nolan's brilliant 2008 film, The Dark Knight. Now, The Dark Knight is a fantastic film, and Heath Ledger's Joker has gone down in history as one of the all-time great portrayals of any comic book character on screen.
Ledger was just so grounded in reality, and I think dealt with themes and specific type of behavioral things that were very, very grounded and really believable and recognizable. I think that's why it resonates, because I think most viewers recognize symptomatically, oh, I know someone that talks like that, or I know someone this could, or I know somebody that's one bad day away from that.
But it might surprise younger audiences that the casting choice was originally criticized.
We had heard that he'd cast somebody, and I remember we heard it was Heath Ledger. And up to that point, like his body of work, he'd been like kind of romantic comedy guy, like he was the handsome teen guy. Wouldn't have been anybody's first choice.
To beat these criticisms, Heath Ledger locked himself in a hotel room for 6 weeks to get into the headspace of the character. And man, did those fanboys end up eating their words.
And then when that first trailer dropped, oh my goodness. And then, of course, it comes out. It's considered one of the greatest, not just superhero movies, but like greatest movies objectively of the past 20, 30 years. And yeah, a lot of those people that had complaints just shut right up. You know?
The Dark Knight's take on the Joker was more grounded than many other comic stories. His skin isn't bleached white. It's very clear that he's wearing makeup and that he's dyeing his hair. He doesn't have a rictus smile, which does occur in the real world, but it's very rare. Instead, he has a Glasgow smile. But even with these changes, Heath Ledger's Joker is just so undeniably the Joker. He's different from his comic book counterparts, and yet it feels like he could have walked off the page.
I think he engages in all these different methods of killing. He is, by definition, exceedingly unpredictable. Again, I think that Heath Ledger's character embodied that, and then also he seemed to get a kick out of doing things that were extremely disturbing.
This is because Nolan carefully cherry-picked parts of the Joker lore so he still feels familiar. For example, he has 2 different versions of how he was scarred.
So I had a wife. She was beautiful. Who tells me I ought to smile more? My father was a drinker.
And they resemble different comic versions of Joker's origin. He's determined to push Harvey Dent into madness, the same way that in The Killing Joke he tried to push Gordon into madness. He even beats Batman with a crowbar, the same way he beat Jason Todd to death in Death in the Family. There's even a Mad Love reference in there.
And again, there's kind of a riff on that in The Dark Knight with the nurse thing, where the guy walks in and that was very much a riff on, I think, the Mad Love thing, where Gordon comes in and the dentist turns around, he's wearing all white, and he turns around, he's got the drill in his hand.
These references keep the Joker familiar while also reinventing his character for a new age. The Dark Knight premiered in 2008. This is very much a Joker of his time.
I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
This Joker leans on theatricality, not just for fun or pizzazz, but for terror. He's fundamentally a terrorist, risking the lives of innocent people to prove an ideological point. In his final battle with Batman, he says,
"You didn't think I'd risk losing the battle for Gotham's soul in a fistfight with you."
Previous Jokers have had one aim, to beat Batman and to look cool while doing it. This Joker, though, has an ideology.
See, their morals, their code. It's a bad joke.
It's an insane ideology, but at least it's an etha. And that's scary to people, especially in 2008. You have to remember, we were only 7 years out from 9/11. Terrorist acts in Gotham, which is proxy New York City, hit us very close to home. Additionally, in 2008, it felt like the world was falling apart because of the financial crisis. We were literally a world in chaos. The image of the Joker burning a pile of cash paired with the phrase,
"Everything burns,"
struck a chord with people who felt like the system hadn't just screwed them, that it was fundamentally broken.
But person, wasn't this movie written before all of that?
It was, but the financial crisis did not happen in a day. In fact, the first sign of the problem, defaulting on subprime mortgages, began to materialize in 2005, and by 2006, alarm bells were being sounded by JP Morgan and UBS. The actual crisis began in 2007, meaning that by the time Dark Knight premiered, people were already dealing with economic uncertainty. Now, this isn't to say that The Dark Knight was necessarily inspired by the oncoming financial crisis, rather to say that, due to a mix of Nolan's genius and serendipity, it premiered at the perfect time for an audience that was racked with economic uncertainty. In 2009, the first game of the acclaimed Arkham series debuted, Batman Arkham Asylum. This game was loosely based on the comic Arkham Asylum, a serious house on serious Earth, both in plot and in some artistic choices. In Batman Arkham Asylum, Joker allows Batman to catch him in order to trap him and Commissioner Gordon in the asylum with him. Like the comic, Batman's forced to fight a series of foes, such as Scarecrow, Killer Croc, and the Joker. Now, the game is less philosophical than the book, which isn't a criticism. Video games and graphic novels are very different media that oftentimes have very different goals. As an action-adventure game, Arkham Asylum is great, but in order to keep the fights interesting, it added a few new things, like the Titan Serum.
Do you say what now?
The Titan Serum is a supercharged Venom Serum. Basically, it made all of the villains super strong. It made aspects of the game, like the final boss fight, really difficult, but so much more rewarding. Artistically, the influences of a serious house on serious Earth are pretty clear. Many of the Asylum features shown to us in Impressionist paintings are fully realized in the game, such as the entrance. Additionally, the ambiance is incredibly similar. It feels dark and cramped, and the layout is almost nonsensical, just like its comic counterpart. Batman Arkham Asylum also took from other parts of Batman lore, specifically the animated series. Both Mark Hamill and Arlene Sorkin reprised their roles as Joker and Harley Quinn, and honestly, as much as I love him in the DCAU, this has to be one of my favorite Hamill performances of all time.
I just wanted to bring down your grim facade and for once let you see the world as I see it, giggling in a corner and bleeding.
For the Joker's design, they didn't keep him quite as unnerving as a serious house on serious Earth, but he's still extremely creepy. To contrast with beefed up Batman, they made him impossibly skinny and gangly. His proportions seem wrong, as if his arms are too long for his body. They also enhance his smile with makeup, which gives him an even more uncanny look whenever he's actually angry. I still can't tell if he's actually smiling the entire time or if it's just the makeup. In my opinion, the game still really holds up today. Now, the 2010s showed an explosion of Joker media, and some of these stories are very confusing. I'm looking at you, New 52. So rather than go through all of this chronologically, we're going to break it down into subsections based on type of media. So let's start with the 2010s comics. In 2011, DC Comics decided to completely relaunch their titles. There was an event called Flashpoint. Now, I don't have time to get into it here, but the main thing was that it reset the entire universe. Flashpoint was also adapted in the Flash movie and the Flash TV series. So from that point in the comics, DC relaunched all of their titles with issue 1.
But why would they do that?
Well, because by 2010, there were 70 years of lore for some of these characters, such as the Joker, and it wasn't all good lore. They wanted to trim the fat off, so to speak, so they kept some of the lore, such as death in the family and the Killing Joke, although Barbara was never paralyzed, and thus she's been the one and only Batgirl. The new and improved Joker debuted in Batman Detective Comics #1, Faces of Death by Scott Snyder. The main takeaway from the story is that the Joker let the doll maker cut off his face to convince the cops that he was dead.
Ew.
I know, right? Now, this is probably a good time to talk about how the New 52 redefined the Joker. The New 52 made the Joker very dark, darker than the Killing Joke or Death in the Family. There was very little clown and shenanigans in this new Joker. Instead, he is a straight-up serial killer that can walk the halls with Leatherface and Jason and hold his own. He's a clown in the same way that the Terrifier is a clown. Technically, but like... And they established this new Joker with his first major storyline, Death of the Family. Now, clearly, this is a reference to the infamous Death in the Family comic from the 1980s, so we all knew that it would be dark, but nothing, and I mean nothing, could prepare us for how dark it would be. It begins with the Joker murdering an entire police precinct so he can steal his face back.
Yeah, but why would he want that?
So he can wear it. like a mask, like a Leatherface mask.
You know, and they had the flies, like Coppola had the flies buzzing around in his exposed muscle. And I was like, ugh. It's so horrible, man. It's just so horrific. But it reinforces that theme that he's just off the reservation and he's full on surrendered whatever little part of humanity was in him.
In typical Joker fashion, he is obsessed with Batman and he thinks the Bat family made Batman weak. So he takes it upon himself to get rid of them. In a genuinely horrifying scene, he kidnaps Bruce and the entire Bat family. And as they're covered in bandages, he forces a brainwashed Pennyworth to serve them their own faces.
What?
Well, luckily, it was all an elaborate joke. In truth, he hoped that Batman would choose to burn them all to death.
But why would he ever do that?
Well, the Joker thinks that they have a special relationship. He truly believes that there is a love between them, and the reason Batman's kept him alive is because he wants to play their games ad infinitum. The Bat Fam, therefore, dilutes their games and makes them less fun. So, of course, Batman would choose to kill them instead of the Joker. Now, of course, that logic is insane, as is the Joker. So they get into a fight, which ends with the Joker throwing himself off a cliff, a nod to his ending in the Dark Knight Returns one-shot. And this comic is filled with references, partially so we know what's still canon. There's the Red Hood, Harley Quinn as Joker's girlfriend, the reservoir where they had their first big conflict, and Arkham Asylum, set similarly to A Serious House on Serious Earth. We also see some tapestry featuring some Batman failures, such as the Laughing Fish and the death of Jason Todd. And yes, that is a tapestry made of people. We don't have to get into it. At the end of Death in the Family, Joker feels betrayed by Batman. He doesn't think their relationship is special, and that inspires his actions in his next big comic event, Batman Endgame. Endgame starts with the Justice League attacking Batman under the influence of a new Joker pathogen. Now, this is a weak attempt to kill Batman. The main point was to put the Justice League out of commission. Bruce finds an antidote, but it takes a few days to work, so they are literally chained to their beds. Joker takes this opportunity to release the same toxin across all of Gotham, basically sparking an island-wide riot. Eventually, this toxin will kill anybody who ingests it, so Bruce is running against the clock to find an antidote. And then we find out that the Joker is kind of immortal.
What?
Yes, it's weird, and we're going to talk about it more in the 2020 section. Like I said, I'm going chronologically off of the comic release date. Basically, the Joker has this thing called Dionysium in his blood that gives him a regenerative healing factor. It's why he's been blown up and jumped off buildings countless times, but never died. We also find out that the Joker knows Bruce's identity when he recreates the night his parents died. The only cure for the pathogen is more Dionysium, which is only found in Joker's spine, and also in the small Dionysium pool. Batman also gets a ton of other criminals to work with him, saying that it's their city and they won't have anyone to terrorize if it completely falls apart. They fight, and in a moment foreshadowed ever since the Killing Joke, they die together. Kind of. This actually was supposed to be the end of the story, but come on, fans always want a sequel. Long story short, Batman actually had amnesia and then he comes back. Joker stepped off the stage for a bit, but then in Justice League Darkseid War, we got a shocking revelation that there's actually 3 Jokers.
What?
I know, it's crazy. And then we got another reboot called DC Universe Reboot, which kept some of the New 52 continuity while also bringing back older lore. And yes, I have to end on the cliffhanger of the 3 Jokers because we still need to talk about the films and video games of the 2010s, but trust me, we're going to revisit the fact that there's somehow 3 Jokers walking around DC Comics.
Get on with it!
So, the 2010s were a very good time for Joker in the video games. The Arkham series, started in 2009 with Batman Arkham Asylum, continued with Arkham City, Arkham Origins, and Arkham Knight, all of which generally got positive reviews. There was also the Injustice Gods Among Us video game. So this was an early multiverse fighting game that gave us some pretty brutal Joker moments. In an alternate universe, the Joker tricks Superman into killing a pregnant Lois Lane. So then, Superman just outright kills Joker. There's like no need for a moral code here. The loss of Lois Lane triggers militaristic instincts in Superman, so he starts the One Earth regime, which enforces global peace.
I cherish peace with all my heart. I don't care how many men, women, and children I need to kill to get it.
Now, in the main universe, Joker also tries to nuke Metropolis, but fails. Then they're accidentally teleported to the One Earth regime, where they have to take down Superman. The game was very well received, and it got a sequel in 2017, but the Joker wasn't part of that storyline, so we're not going to go into it here. So, I hope you like that. I hope you've had your fill of good Joker, because now I got to talk about 2016. Now, 2016 was a rough year for the Joker in movies. There were 2 adaptations, both of which were critically panned. The first was the live-action Suicide Squad, and the second, surprisingly, was an animated version of The Killing Joke. So let's start with Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad is just a bad movie through and through. There's no way around it, and Jared Leto's portrayal of Joker contributed to that badness. I truly believe that his version of Joker is one of the biggest downfalls of that entire movie.
I don't want no beef.
You want no beef?
You don't want no beef? You don't want no beef?
So let's start with the costuming. The costuming has literally become a meme because of how bad it is.
And then when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, dude, what did he work as a manager at Hot Topic? Like, what the is this? It's like Juggalo Joker, like, you know?
It turned Joker from a scary villain into an edgelord that would hang around on 4chan. He didn't look menacing, he looked like a guy who was trying to look menacing. And there is nothing less menacing than that. It wasn't all the costume though. Harley Quinn also didn't have a great costume for that movie, and Margot Robbie's portrayal is still beloved. A lot of this had to do with Jared Leto's choices for this portrayal. It seems like Jared Leto modeled his performance off of gangster films, but the whole point of the Joker is that he is not a gangster. One of the creators, Jerry Robinson, specifically said that he created a character that would not be a typical mob boss. Does the Joker act like a gangster in the comics sometimes? Yes, but it's to get money for his crazy schemes. This gangster portrayal of him fundamentally misunderstood the character. Leto also failed to portray the real insanity of the Joker. He seems like someone trying to seem crazy, which is lame. It just feels like watching an edgy 15-year-old.
If I'm watching somebody and like, I know I could kick their ass, it kind of takes me out of the movie a little bit.
He was also very weird and toxic on set, resulting in some of his castmates disliking him. He's a method actor and he went very method. He sent every one of the cast really weird and inappropriate gifts. He sent Margot Robbie a rat and Viola Davis a dead pig. On the red carpet, he said that he sent them sex toys to keep an air of surprise. Now, he walked back some of these claims in 2021, but I mean, every one of the cast said they got weird gifts separately, and he's notably left out of photos from cast hangouts. This, paired with the genuinely bad portrayal of the Joker, is why he was only ever featured in the DCEU in cameos from this point on. So there are some small victories in the world. We also got the animated version of the Killing Joke featuring Mark Hamill as Joker. And let me be clear, I think that Hamill killed it.
Oh God, literary discussions can get so dry, can't they?
In fact, it's sad that the movie was so widely panned because Mark Hamill specifically wanted to return for this storyline. He even encouraged people to petition for it.
So what went wrong? I mean, the comic was so darn good, right?
Well, the writer, Brian Azzarello, decided to add some of his own material, and it was not good. It actually involved Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, almost getting sexually assaulted and then having sex with Bruce.
Wait, I thought he was like a daddy figure to her.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the timeline, but typically he met her when she was 14 or 15 years old. She's an adult by the time she becomes Batgirl, but it's still just gross.
You know, inserting that, it just was so inappropriate and it changed the dynamic so dramatically. And having Barbara Gordon and Batman making out and like banging, like, come on, man, come on.
Now, they claimed they wanted to give her more agency after Killing Joke was retroactively accused of fridging her. But the problem is, they attempted to do so through sleeping with the father figure, which is not very empowering. To a lot of people, it seemed like they just wanted to fill the story out, but didn't actually have much to say. The animation is also criticized. It's very rough at points, and again, it just feels like they phoned it in. It's sad because apart from Mark Hamill, the rest of the movie is just so bad that his acting chops can't make up for it. Now, after the nightmare that was 2016, we got Joker 2019. This was a completely new take on the character by Todd Phillips. Now, in case you haven't seen it or want a quick reminder before swallow ado, here is a quick recap. Arthur Fleck is a clown in Gotham with a neurological condition that causes him to laugh uncontrollably.
Sorry, I haven't.
He shares an apartment with his mother, who delusionally believes that she had a fling with Thomas Wayne years ago. He also has mental health problems, seeing a state-provided counselor, and taking several psychiatric meds. After getting robbed by some children, his co-worker gives him a gun, which eventually results in him being fired. Now, after getting fired, he is harassed on the subway by some finance guys. He shoots 2 of them in self-defense and then mercilessly hunts down the 3rd attacker. He flees the scene, and the crime becomes a symbol for the poor, downtrodden Gothamites. The state removes his access to mental health care, causing him to spiral further into delusion. After a failed open mic comedy show, he's invited on a network talk show when that video goes viral. He also finds out that his mother was never in a relationship with Thomas Wayne and that his neurological condition might be caused by neglect when he was a child. This causes him to snap. He kills his mother, an old worker, before dressing up as a clown for the Murray Show. And then we get this scene.
Get what you deserve!
As he's taken to the police station, a riot breaks out across the city inspired by his subway killings. So the movie really questions what's real. We find out things are delusions halfway through, and the ending is very ambiguous, and some things just seem, well, impossible. One of the issues with trying to create an origin for the Joker is that, in the comics, his origin story is literally all over the place. There is no definitive answer. To encompass that energy in the movie, the audience is left wondering what is actually real and what's completely made up. Now, the movie is revered for its direction, and Joaquin Phoenix won an Oscar Joker for his portrayal, which I think was incredibly deserved. Phoenix's Joker lost some of the clownier elements of the character. He has theatrical moments, but he ultimately isn't doing the insane hijinks that we saw in the 70s. So the movie is set in the early 1980s, and it draws heavily from Martin Scorsese films like Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy. But the setting is very deliberate. The movie is placing Arthur in this time of place because this was at the height of something called neoliberalism. The idea of neoliberalism was that if you were to simply lower the taxes on the rich, then the rich would fund charities instead of the government having to fund social programs. Neoliberalism proved to be an ultimate failure, and people like Arthur were the casualty of that. Arthur's character in the movie is somebody who struggles to be seen. People walk by him without noticing him, and even as a clown, he can't garner the attention of people that he's trying to reach by spinning his sign. There's even a scene where Arthur tries to walk through an automatic door, and the censor doesn't see him. Now, Arthur's plight is symbolic of the plight of the lower economic classes. Just as the poor of Gotham long to be seen, so does Arthur. Especially, he wants to be seen by Thomas Wayne, the billionaire or millionaire who is running for mayor. He believes that Thomas Wayne is his father, so he's trying to get love and recognition from him. Now, the climax of the movie shows this riot breaking out because of Arthur's actions, a riot that results in Thomas Wayne being shot in front of young Bruce Wayne. So the movie is trying to say that the economic conditions created by wealthy people like Bruce Wayne's father actually led to the creation of Batman. From the movie's point of view, Batman is a fascist retaliation against the lower classes. But the movie isn't without its controversies. It strayed away from a lot of the typical Joker characterization. Director-writer Todd Phillips claimed that it was loosely inspired by the Killing Joke in Dark Knight Returns, but it doesn't follow any of the storylines and abandons most lore. In fact, the name Arthur Fleck never appeared in the comics. Now, some people have criticized that it doesn't necessarily feel like the Joker we know in the comics. Instead, it feels more like a Joker-inspired original character. This movie also paints Arthur in a pretty sympathetic light. Before he snaps, we see life beat the shit out of him left and right. It's hard to not feel bad for him, and that is one of the bigger controversies of the movie. The intersection of violence and mental illness in this film is messy. It definitely highlights that Arthur losing access to mental health services was bad, but there's been criticism on both sides of the spectrum. On one hand, people claim that the movie seems to excuse Arthur's violence because of his mental health issues, similarly to what often happens with school shooters. On the other hand, people claim this movie equates mental illness with violence, further stigmatizing mental health issues. Now, despite the controversy, the film was incredibly successful, putting Joker movies back on the map after some disappointing performances. Alright guys, we made it to the 2020s. So there wasn't any Joker media outside of the comics until 2024. Part of that was due to COVID-19, but it was also due to the pure deluge of Joker content that we got in the 2010s. So I'm only going to talk about comics from the last 4 years in this section, but buckle up, cause it is gonna get weird. So, the Three Jokers storyline by Jeff Johns follows the Darkseid War storyline from 2016. It starts with 3 separate crimes committed by the Joker at the same time in different locations. Then, 3 separate versions of the Joker meet up, and they each represent a different era of the Joker. The first Joker, the criminal, represents the Golden Age Joker. Of the 3 Jokers, he is the least theatrical and wacky. He's more pragmatic and driven. The second Joker, the clown, represents Silver Age Joker. He's the silly, goofy guy of the bunch. He wants pranks, hijinks, and anarchy. He's also the one who killed Jason Todd, so just because he's a clown does not mean that he is harmless. Now, the last Joker is the comedian, representing the Bronze and Modern Age Joker. He is the evil one, the one who paralyzed Barbara and tortured Gordon in The Killing Joke. He also still hallucinates his wife and child from that story, and it's super creepy. Now, they're all meeting because they want to create a new 4th Joker. Then Red Hood, aka Jason Todd, kills the clown Joker, going completely against the Bat family morality.
Say what? I thought Jason Todd was dead.
Okay, he was. The Joker killed him, but then, years later, DC decided to bring him back using this thing called the Lazarus Pit. A lot happens, but long story short, he becomes a kind of sort of part of the Bat family as Red Hood. Oh, and speaking of retcons, in this timeline, the Killing Joke happened, but Barbara regained the ability to walk and is still Batgirl.
Yeah, but
I can't get into it, Doug, because then we would be here all day. So, the last 2 Jokers decide that Red Hood is the perfect candidate. So they kidnap him, exploit his trauma, and then they beat him again with a crowbar. The guy cannot catch a break. Luckily, Batman and Batgirl save him at the last minute. So the 2 remaining Jokers decide that Joe Chill, the man who murdered Bruce's parents, should be the new Joker since he'll matter to him. There's a big fight, Batman saves Joe, and Barbara gets revenge on the Joker who shot her, and then the comedian shoots the criminal. Now the comedian, aka the modern Joker, is taken to jail, and Bruce reveals that he's known who the comedian was all along. But he's never told him because his wife and child are actually still alive. After this, there was the Joker War. Joker took over Wayne Enterprises, running the business into the ground and also ruining Bruce Wayne's reputation. Harley Quinn, who had a villain to anti-hero arc that involved her leaving the Joker, decides that she'll kill the Joker herself by forcing Batman to save either her or the Joker. Batman chooses her, the Joker blows up, but of course, Batman does not trust that he is actually dead. After that, that, Joker got his own run, except it was kind of Gordon's run. Basically, James Gordon is hired to kill the Joker, and given his past and resentment toward the clown, he says yes. When tracking the Joker, he finds out about a shadow organization called the Network, who clones supervillains to keep the public distracted from their actual shady dealings. It turns out that they were actually the ones who put a price on Joker's head. Long story short, the Joker and Gordon take down the main family, and the Joker escapes Gordon's grasp by, you guessed it, killing someone. And that brings us to the most recent Joker run, The Man Who Stopped Laughing. He's been out of Gotham for a while, and his notoriety has faded, even among his fellow supervillains. They force him out of Gotham. So Joker does what every failed New York City comedian does. He goes to LA. And then he decides that he's going to take over all of the United States. Now, this comic run just ended this year, so I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but it's a really fun reinvention of the character. Now, 2024 saw the sequel to Joker called Joker Folie à Deux, which I'm going to talk about in just a bit. But before I can talk about that film, we have to talk about the cultural impact of the Joker. Throughout the years, Joker has become a cultural icon, with each new iteration encompassing a different part of cultural consciousness. From his original Golden Age creation to the tragic loner in the Joker, he's adapted to the cultural landscape of his age. At his core, the Joker represents chaos, and there's never a time when we, as a society, feel completely safe. In the back of our minds, we're always aware that could all come crashing down, whether it be from war, political strife, terrorism, or economic collapse. The Joker will never go away because that fear is always going to be with us. The fear that any day now, anarchy and chaos will take over our lives.
Surprise, shawty!
But in the last 20 years, the Joker's taken another place in our cultural consciousness. The fear that we will go crazy.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
The Killing Joke proposed that it took just one bad day for someone to snap, and the last 20 years have been extremely turbulent for us culturally. There's obviously a meme about people relating to the Joker.
I'm a lot like Joker. From the movie Joker.
But we should talk about why so many people seem to relate to this character now. Heath Ledger's Joker and Joaquin Phoenix's Joker both implicitly and explicitly were left out of society.
Joaquin Phoenix, to me, is that version is the most tragic one, because to me that movie is really is a pretty scathing indictment on our mental health system, on our medical system, on a lot of the stuff that's screwed up bureaucratically that limits how much people can get help when they really need it from a mental health perspective.
These characters are angry. They're acting out of an impulse for revenge just as much as anything else. We can't ignore that mental health struggles play a huge role in society's identification with the Joker. Now, there is a staggering lack of access to mental health treatment in the United States. Almost everything's been privatized, and access is determined in large part by your financial situation. But of course, mental health struggles often inhibit people's ability to thrive in a capitalist system. Arthur Fleck has an entry in his journal that says the worst part of having a mental illness is that people expect you to behave as if you don't. Arthur was not a character that could function well enough to be financially successful, and that limited his ability to get treatment.
They've cut our funding. We're closing down our offices next week.
How am I supposed to get my medication now?
Now, there's a popular fan theory that Heath Ledger's Joker was a veteran, and veterans often struggle with post-military job placement. Then they have a hard time getting mental health care, even though they often need it the most from what they endured while serving our country. Now, I want to be very clear that this is not to say that mental health leads to violence. That is a completely unfair stigma surrounding mental health struggles. But societal anger about being left out and stranded is one of the reasons why we've seen so many people identify with the Joker in the past 20 years.
You know, the world's a very chaotic place. It's increasingly chaotic. We all try to find order in our lives, but it's also, I think, assuring to know that there are other people that are kind of lost in the chaos. And, you know, Joker represents that, I think.
The Joker sequel, Joker Folie à Deux, centers on the consequences of Arthur embracing the Joker persona in the first film. He has become a celebrity as the economically disenfranchised people have rallied around his image of this performer, the Joker. Another mental patient, Lee Quinzel, becomes obsessed with his Joker persona. So I want to stay spoiler-free for this film, but I will say that it does feel like an attack on many of those people who embraced the first film as a sort of call to arms for anarchists. In the first movie, Arthur struggles to be seen, and in the sequel, he still struggles to be seen because people only care about his Joker persona. The angry public uses him as a vessel for their own frustrations about the world, as symbolized by this scene where Lee paints a smile on the glass so Arthur can fill the role that she wants him to play. I am very excited to see where the next 20 years of the Joker takes us. He is a malleable character built on an unshakable premise, and it's going to be a long time time before he disappears from cultural consciousness. I'm sure, come 2040, that we'll see his eyes staring back at us from a comic book cover, reminding us that any type of chaos could lurk right around the corner. So guys, that is our definitive history of the Joker. Massive shout out to the writer of this video, Brianna McLarty. We could not have done this without her. You can find her social links below. And let us know what you think is the definitive Joker story down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, guys, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.